Hi, my name is Sarah Bailey, and I am speaking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States. In the year 1933. During this time, a lot was happening across the nation. America was in a severe depression from 1929 to 1939. It was the longest depression in American history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt failed to effectively end the Great Depression, which leads me into my first claim. FDR overtaxed Americans. Roosevelt raised the taxes outrageously. During the Great Depression, income taxes were raised for wealthy Americans in order to create massive government jobs programs and to lower the high unemployment rates. In 1933, tax rates rose to 63%. This means that the people in this tax bracket were making 47 cents on the dollar. Imagine working and receiving a paycheck of $100 worth of work and only receiving $47. This means you're less likely to spend money, which is bad for an economy during a depression. Raising taxes too high is bad for the economy. Raising taxes on the rich discouraged the rich to get richer. What makes the rich richer? Starting new businesses, which also creates jobs. Economist Stephen Moore stated raising taxes on the rich hurts the economy. It takes money right out from under the small and medium-sized business owners, leaving them with less for hiring more workers. Let's say a wealthy businessman makes $1 million in a year. Each year, they will only be receiving $470,000. This is $637,000 to create, to create artificial jobs for the government. The average wages per year in 1933 was $1,550 per year. Imagine the wealthy businessman taking the extra money that the government took from the taxes and creating jobs. These would be real, unchanged jobs, unlike the artificial jobs created by the government, which leads me into my second claim. The New Deal was a failure. What was the New Deal? The editors of Britannica Encyclopedia defines the New Deal as the domestic program of the administrations of United States President Franklin Delano Roosevelt between 1933 and 1939, which took action to bring about immediate economic relief, as well as reform industries in agriculture, finance, water, power, labor, and housing, vastly increasing the scope of federal government's activities. The New Deal was FDR's response to the Great Depression. Many jobs created by the New Deal were temporary. The editors of Britannica state the New Deal was the administration's first objective was to alleviate the suffering of the nation's huge number of unemployed workers. Agencies established to dispense emergency short-term government aid and provide temporary jobs. While this was a time when jobs were needed, creating temporary jobs is only a temporary fix. It is like putting on a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches. You don't actually solve the problem. The New Deal became too costly to continue with the jobs. The problem with artificial jobs is when the government spending gets cut, the jobs get cut, leaving people unemployed and right back where they started, which is why the New Deal backlashed after making cuts. In 1937, FDR cut spending to reduce the debt. That cutback in the New Deal spending pushed the economy back into depression, according to historian Kimberly Amundo. And she also stated the unemployment drastically went from 14.3% to 19% by 1938. The cutback of the artificial jobs made the unemployment rise about 5%. The New Deal did not conquer unemployment. Unemployment never dropped below 14% under FDR during the 1930s, and the decade ended in 1939 with a 20.7 unemployment rate. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate is currently 4.4%, for an idea of how high 20% is. Another part of the New Deal was switching off the gold standard, which leads me into my third claim. FDR devalued the dollar by compensating the U.S. citizens' gold. Roosevelt created an executive order prohibiting gold hoarding. Definition of Executive Order 6102 from the Free Financial Dictionary. A 1933 Executive Order 6102 by U.S. FDR forbidding persons and corporations in the United States from owning more than a token amount of gold All gold over the legal limit was required to be sold to the federal government at a price of $20.67 an ounce. The order was made moot a year later with the passage of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. It became illegal for citizens to own gold because of this executive order. FDR's gold compensation meant the private owners were obligated to take their coins and bars or gold certificates to a bank and exchange them for dollars, prevailing the rate of $20.67 per ounce. After buying the gold for this price, the president then raised his official gold price to $35 an ounce, effectively cutting 40% off of the dollar in a bid to stoke inflation and spur the economy. Devaluing the dollar is bad for an economy during a depression. A research fellow in financial regulations, Norbert Michael, states, here are 2 implications of devaluation. First, devaluation makes the exports in the country cheaper for foreigners. Second, it makes imported goods more expensive for domestic consumers. Devaluing the dollar creates an increase of prices coming in and a decrease of the prices leaving the country. So the consumers now have to pay more for what they buy and get less for what they sell. Norbert Michael also stated, nonetheless, the main problem with the devaluation, it robs the citizens of their purchasing power. If the US government devalued the dollar, for example, it would reduce the value of each and every dollar earned by the US workers and every dollar saved by US retirees. When the value of the dollar goes down, prices increase. Not only were the taxes so high that people were holding on to their money, the prices of everything were shooting up. And this is why FDR failed to effectively end the Great Depression.
Save it.
This is how you know. She's treating this now the market for two cents.
All right, Sarah. The proposition is very clearly identified at the beginning of the speech, so that's fine. But there's no preview of what the supporting structure is going to be, so we're not exactly sure how you're going to prove your argument until you get to those individual points. So that, I think, is a little bit of a problem. Remember, we're dealing with the communication issues here also. And I think I've mentioned it a couple of times. I mentioned it before. You can't trust your audience. 2-5. You know, listening is complicated. Most people think they're good listeners. The truth of the matter is we're not good listeners, and you got to help them along. And one of the ways that you help them is giving them signposts and patterns and structures so it's easier for them to retain information. So I think that that's the biggest weakness that you had in the speech, is that there's not that structure at the beginning of the speech. Now, in the body of the speech, you did a good job because you do signpost the points as you get to them, and you've got a numerical signpost, and you've got a pretty clear statement of what the claim is at each of those points. So I think that structurally you're fine, so it's just something to fix, kind of a mechanical thing at the beginning of the speech. Like I said, everything's pretty well organized, and you do a good job internally explaining the assumptions on each of these points pretty well. Proving the assumptions is also pretty solid. I heard a lot of testimony from authorities, historians, economists talking about these issues, so that made a lot of sense, and there were good explanations provided by those sources, so that was pretty solid. You've got a variety of examples that you're using that they also work pretty well. A couple of times I think you could use a little bit more citation of those examples that you're talking about. I wasn't sure what the source was, for example, on the tax rates. And that's a piece of factual data. That shouldn't be hard to cite. That wasn't a big deal. All the testimony you cited, and I thought that was the right thing to do, but it was a little bit inconsistent on some of the other information that's in the presentation. But generally, a very solid job on the information that's being presented. I think you make solid inferences on your points. I thought you had a good exit line. You could have used a little bit more of a summary. And your delivery, if I'm just listening to you, it's pretty effective because it's dynamic and there's energy in what you're saying, and you've got some force on a couple of points, so you're trying to keep us engaged. When I look up, of course, it's a lot of reading going on. So, and I don't expect people to memorize all of the statistics and the quotes that you've got, but you should know what your argument is strong enough that you can look at us and say, you know, he raised the taxes, which was a bad idea. The New Deal itself didn't succeed at accomplishing the job of creating jobs, and going on the gold standard created huge problems for us. Now, let me tell you why that's true, and then you can kind of look down and look at some of your data and quotes, and then come back up and kind of engage us a little bit more. And I think that would, it wasn't a huge criticism, but it's something that's noticeable, and you want to be able to talk to your audience. All right, thank you.